House of Israel International Services are held weekly at 3601 Rose Lake Drive, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28217, 11 a.m. Saturday mornings and 7 p.m. Thursday evenings, Eastern Time. This live broadcast is made possible through financial contributions from brothers and sisters like you. Your financial support is greatly appreciated. Thank you. Motivating. Inspiring. Challenging. Encouraging. Deepening. Strengthening. And enhancing your faith. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to House of Israel International's live worship service.
To tithe or not to tithe, and we're going to bring this teaching to a conclusion today. But I wanted to just take a few moments and recap where we've been so that we're not going to be looking at these scriptures. We've got part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 on our website. And so you can look at those until Yeshua comes. I don't think they'll change unless, of course, YouTube shuts down. I don't see that happening anytime soon, but just in case it does, I encourage you to rush, make sure you see them, and if you need to, download them on your own personal device so that you'll have them for eternity. Hallelujah. To recap, we started off in Genesis and we began to look at the foundation of giving. We don't know why Cain and Abel presented Jehovah an offering, but we know they did. There is no instructions. There is no evidence that Adam or Eve, Mr. or Mrs. Adam, ever presented an offering before the Almighty. We do know that Jehovah made a skin out of an animal to clothe them. And so the perception there is that he sacrificed an animal on their behalf to clothe them. But then we see that Adam and Eve never, at least from a scriptural perspective, made an offering unto the Almighty. Now Cain and Abel comes, and Cain brings from the fruit of the ground, which was not accepted. Abel brings the firstling and the fat thereof, which gives us insight, and we begin to connect that to the book of Leviticus to see how did Abel know to bring the firstling and the fat thereof, and why was it acceptable unto the Almighty and Cain's offering was not. We moved from there and we looked at Noah, how Noah, after the flood, he presented offerings, sacrifices unto the Almighty, and they were a sweet savor. And from that, the Almighty blessed Noah and his family and made a declaration that he would never again destroy the earth by flood. We moved beyond and we saw that Abraham now has this strange encounter after going to war among 9 kings, 4 who had fought against the other 5, and then Lot, his nephew, had been captured. Abraham takes his men, goes and rescues Lot, defeats these kings, and has the spoil of 9 kings, 9 kingdoms at his disposal. We see that he gives a tithe of everything based on what the scripture says. He gave tithes of all, and I dare to say that there probably wasn't any rams, any bullocks, any goats, or any animals per se that he was giving tithes from, but he gave tithe of all the spoil. We also see that the kings, especially the king of Sodom, wanted the men. And Abraham said that he would not take anything from among them because he had lifted his hand up to the Almighty, that he would not receive anything from them, and therefore no one can say that Abraham became rich because of men. So Abraham now gives tithes of all to this strange person who shows up. After battle, he gives him tithes of all, and the Bible says that this man, Melchizedek, which was a priest of the Most High. Now notice it didn't say he was a high priest of the Most High, but he was a priest of the Most High, which Abraham gave a tithe of everything, or tithes of all. So he gave him a tenth of that, a tenth of that, a tenth of that, a tenth of that, a tenth of that. You get the picture? He gave a tenth of all the spoils, whatever that was. We find that Jacob now, as he is about to go on this venture where he makes a promise after realizing that he's at the very bottom of the stairway that leads to heaven, and he makes a declaration that he would give a tithe of everything if the Almighty would take him and then bring him back safely. Now we know that as we begin to look at Abraham has in his loins, and we looked at Hebrews, how Hebrews declared that Abraham, when he gave tithe, he actually gave tithe for Isaac, for Jacob, for Israel, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and for Levi. And so because they all came out of him, that he was actually establishing a principle of giving tithes to a priest of the Most High. Note, not the high priest, but the priest of the Most High. And so as we look at that, we see that he gave a tithe to Melchizedek, Genesis 14:20. Jacob promises a tithe of everything in Genesis 28, verses 20 through 22. We discovered that, contrary to popular belief, the tithe did not belong to the Levites. The tithe belonged to Jehovah. The tithe always belonged to Jehovah. When Abraham gave a tithe, he did not give a tithe to Levi. As a matter of fact, Levi gave a tithe through Abraham according to the scripture. So the tithes did not belong to the Levites. Now, this is a sticking point for most people, because the biggest argument out there today is that the tithes belong to the Levites. And because there are no Levites, there is no tithe process that we can subscribe to, when the fact of the matter is tithe was established long before there ever was Levi or Levites. The tithe belongs to Jehovah. Now, we discuss in Leviticus 27, verse 30, that the tithe was holy and that they belonged to the Almighty. But we also looked in Numbers 18:21, and we saw where Jehovah is the one who gave the tithe to Levi. But he gave the tithe to Levi because, according to Numbers chapter 18, Levites, or the Levites, worked in the temple. He gave the tithe to the Levites for the work they did. Now, this is important, because the tithe didn't belong to the Levites. The tithe belonged to Jehovah, and Jehovah is the one who gave the tithe. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is that Jehovah is still the one who the tithe belongs to. It didn't belong to Levi. It didn't belong to Levi in Adam's day, in Cain, in Abel's day, in Abraham's day, in Jacob's day. So it was Jehovah who determines where the tithe go. If a person doesn't get that, then they will be stuck in religious thinking, not understanding that the tithe did not belong to the Levites. It belonged to Jehovah. We also identified that even the Levites had to pay tithe. Numbers 18, verses 28 and 29, we looked at the fact that the Levites were required to take a tenth. Now understand that the tithe was the best, and the Levites had to take the best from the best. they were required to give a tenth of the best from the tenths they had received. So everybody was required. When the people withheld their tithe, they were considered as backslidden and robbing Jehovah. Now understand something, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not making any of this stuff up. All of the scriptures are there. We identified that when people didn't tithe, then you can generally recognize people who may have issues with tithe, especially believers who have issues with tithe may also have issues with finances. They may also have issues with money. You see, the tithe is Jehovah's way and means and plans of blessing his people financially. You see, so when a person withheld the tithe, the Father withheld certain things from them. In the book of Malachi, he withheld the rain. In the book of Malachi, he did not protect the crops against the locusts. So the people's crops were being devoured. The folks stopped bringing the tithe. The priests became corrupt. The priests now are thankful for whatever they get and pronouncing a blessing on the people. And the Father says, how can you as priests pronounce blessings on people who are robbing me? I'm going to take the dung of these animals and put it in your face. Your blessings will be a curse. Again, I didn't write that. Malachi chapter 1 all the way through chapter 3, and you'll see that when the people withheld their tithes, they were considered as backslidden and they were considered as robbing the Almighty. We identified that the tithe had absolutely nothing to do with the tabernacle. There was no tabernacle when Abraham gave tithe. There was no tabernacle when Jacob promised the tithe. But somehow through the idea of progressive revelation, which is a theological term, by the way, somehow through the idea of progressive revelation, individuals concluded that this was Jehovah's intent. But we find from the scriptures that it was not. It was never Jehovah's intent. And we're going to look at that today. The tithe had absolutely nothing to do with the tabernacle. The people brought offerings of their own free will. When they were instructed, when Moses was instructed to build the tabernacle, according to Exodus chapter 25, he said, tell the people to bring to me an offering and let it be of their own free will. And this is what you ought to ask them to bring. So any person who wanted to bring it can bring it. Any person who didn't want to bring it didn't have to bring it. And we find that in that there was more than enough to where the people had to actually be commanded to stop bringing. But it was a free will offering. It was not a tithe. It was not a requirement for the tabernacle. The tithe had absolutely nothing to do with the temple. The people didn't gather offerings and a building fund to build the temple. David gathered the material for the purpose of building the temple. And then Solomon added to it. And so we find in 1 Kings chapter 6 through 9 that this accumulation of things and between David and Solomon was what was used for the building of the temple. So Jehovah did not require a tithe to build the tabernacle. He did not require a tithe for the temple to be built. And he did not require tithing for the tabernacle or the temple to be sustained. We looked at that. Tithing was done long before there was a tabernacle or temple. And the temple, according to Nehemiah chapter 10, because if you remember, the first temple that was built by Solomon was destroyed. The people were taken into exile because they had refused to let the land rest. And when they were allowed to return, the treasures were opened in Babylon and given to the people, and the people came back. And it was Nehemiah now, through the building of the second temple, began to institute what is known as a temple tax. And this came from a census, Nehemiah chapter 10. We noted that this practice of tithing took place in Yeshua's day, and part 7 of our teaching was dedicated to that particular part. Also, Paul did not address tithing. People want to know, well, how come Jesus didn't talk about the tithe? How come Jesus didn't talk about it? Well, you got to understand that Yeshua was ministering to a people who were not Gentiles. These individuals had been practicing the commands and Judaism based in the commands for their entire existence. So why do he need, see, according to modern Christianity, the idea in theological circles, ladies and gentlemen, is that anything that was carried over from the Old Testament to the New Testament was reestablished by Jesus. Meaning that if Jesus didn't mention it, it wasn't carried over. That's the idea. See, you aren't exposed to that, but that's the mindset, that's the doctrine, the theology behind. So when you begin that, well, he talked about these commands, so these commands are still in place. But since he didn't mention any of those other commands, then those commands are no longer in place. See? So Paul did not address tithing because it was already an established practice, not because it had been done away with, for then he would have taught against the law. Now, unfortunately, many Christians believe that he taught against the law, that he disannulled the law, that he was against it, when in fact, the truth is he didn't. Paul bridged the gap and made the connection between the serving in the temple according to the law and preaching the gospel of the kingdom. You can find this in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 9 through 14. Paul believed in and lived according to the law of Jehovah. And we took a look at Acts chapter 24, verses 14 and following. This is what he said, but this I confess unto you after the way which they call heresy, the they, because he's speaking to the government, and the they are the religious leaders who had accused. Now understand something. In Acts chapter 5, in Acts chapter 6, we see some events happen. In Acts chapter 7, we see the stoning of Stephen. Paul now gets authority to go after those who follow Yeshua and bring them to justice because they were heretics. They were blasphemers. According to the Torah, they could be actually jailed and imprisoned. Now, Paul didn't kill them because he didn't have that authority, but he locked them up, he put them in shackles, he put them in chains, and then after a corrupt trial, just like the one Yeshua endured at the hands of these individuals, they were put to death. Stephen was stoned on the spot. Now, Paul is going and he's taking followers of Yeshua and bringing them to so-called justice until he has an encounter on a road to Damascus, which, by the way, is the same Damascus that you're hearing on the news today. You see, the road to Damascus was not leading to some part of Israel. It was leading to some part of Syria. Paul's community, the fellowship, the congregation that Paul worshiped in was in Antioch, which was also in Syria. And so when you don't have a connection between the geography and the scripture, the assumption is that all things took place within a certain parameter in a land called the Holy Land. When the fact is that is not true. Paul says, after the way which they, the religious leaders, call heresy, because anybody who followed Yeshua, when we were talking on Thursday concerning the lie that endures, if you remember, after the crucifixion, a command was given that armed guards be posted at the tomb to make sure that Yeshua's disciples didn't come at night and steal his body, and then they would say that he had risen. Well, we know that the angels came, removed the stone from the tomb. Yeshua left the tomb, and it was reported, some men were given money, and it was communicated that his disciples came and stole his body. There was no resurrection. And according to the Bible, it says that this is what was communicated even to this day. There are still people who believe Jesus is dead. I was looking at Facebook, and there's a fellow on Facebook. I'm trying to decide whether or not to unfriend him. I've never unfriended anybody, but this guy's about to get on my last nerves. And, I've endured, but he keep posting these ridiculous posts talking about how can people worship a dead man who's been dead for 2,000 years. Now, guess who they're talking about? He's Jewish. You see, that he's dead, he's been dead, and people are worshiping a dead man. See, this is the lie that still lives today among many. And so there are those of us who, because we believe a certain thing, the assumption is because we live in this country that everybody believes this. The fact of the matter is, folks, there are a majority of people who do not believe according to the Christian way, and those of us who have entered into that narrow path of following the Messiah, let me tell you something, folks. You are considered to be by far pariahs. You are ones who have fallen from grace, who've departed from the faith. You've lost your minds. You've even gotten away from mainline traditional religion, and you would be the very ones that not only the Pharisee spirit that lives today, but that papal bull or pope it's called papal bull, is that's the stuff they teach. That this stuff that we do today, ladies and gentlemen, keeping the Sabbath, following the commands, honoring the feast days, abandoning Christmas and Easter and all of the mainline traditional accepted practices, that we've literally lost our minds. When the fact of the matter is, he has helped us find it. Amen. You see. People want to say that we're in bondage. Ladies and gentlemen, I was in bondage in the church. You know what I'm saying? I was in bondage, and I was taught how to keep people in bondage. And unfortunately, people who come out of the church want to put you into now a messianic bondage. You know what I'm saying? Because that controlling spirit is alive today. You can put any kind of face on it. You can put any kind of name on it. You can put any kind of denominational brand on it. But for some reason or another, we not only have a problem with not being able to control certain people, but we have an even greater problem with people who exercise their freedom. If people want to go to hell, that's their choice. If people don't want to serve the God I serve, that's their choice. You understand what I'm saying? If a man wants to marry another man, that's his choice. I don't agree with it. I don't believe in it. I think it's an abomination straight from the pit of hell, but that's their choice. So now my choice is not to deal with it. Just like I don't deal with fornicators and adulterers and liars and people who dabble in witchcraft. To me, they're all in the same category. So you make a choice as to who you fellowship with or who you don't fellowship with, and you don't let other people make those choices for you. There are people out there who want to make the choices for you. They're called Republicans. They're called Democrats. They're called independents. They're called Methodists and Baptists and Pentecostals. They're Messianic Jews, Messianic Judaism, Hebrew Roots, Two House. They want to tell you, they're sacred name people. They want to tell you you can't use the name. They want to tell you if you're going to use the name, you have to say it this way. You have to say it that way. And it's like, why can't we just all be free? Because whom the Son sets free is free indeed. Why would I allow my Messiah to set me free to let another man put me in religious bondage? Do you hear what I'm saying? Be free. You are free to serve him and to worship him. And I'm here as a guide. That's my role, is to help guide. Not to try to tell people what to do, but to guide. You're going to see this even more as we get deeper into this message. So Paul says, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. But they want to say, no, Paul don't believe in the law. He's teaching against the law. Well, Paul says, hey, wait a minute. I don't know where they get that from. But if you got people who won't read their Bible, who read over the Bible, and who read certain passages of the Bible that the church tells them to read, they avoid a whole bunch of it. And they'll believe what the preacher says instead of what the word says. The Hebrew writer connects the tithe to Abraham. In Hebrews chapter 7, and this is where we'll pick up, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High. Notice he was priest of the Most High. Now, I keep saying this because it's important. He was not a high priest. And there are people who say, well, he was a high priest. Well, there's nowhere in the Bible that I've found that it says that. Now, the other question is, if he was priest of the Most High, what was he priest at? There was no tabernacle. There was no temple. So where was he priest at, and what was his priestly duties? Hello, somebody. I'm still yet to find somebody who can answer those questions, and I dare not speculate, because I'll be the first one to tell you, unlike I could say when I was a Christian pastor, I had to make stuff up. What you mean you don't know? What else don't you know? You see, I can say with confidence today, you know what? I don't know, but if you find it, I would certainly love to know. You see what I'm saying? So I don't have to know everything. I wasn't called to know everything. They used to call people who thought they know everything know-it-alls. I was never called, well, I guess I was. But it was in a sarcastic manner. It wasn't like they really believed that I knew everything. Is that they're telling me you think you know everything and you don't. You didn't know it all. Had a big mouth. Now the Father's using it. He'll work all things together for you. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Now again, we don't know what his priestly duties were, but obviously he was in the blessing business. Can you at least say, he blessed Abraham, so we don't know how he blessed Abraham, but we do know, well, let's keep reading. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom Abraham gave a 10th part, tithe of all, first being by interpretation king of righteousness, after that also king of Salem, which is king of peace, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. And what they're saying is that, it's not that Melchizedek just appeared out of thin air, is that we don't have history. We don't have his birth certificate. Who knows? He could be from Hawaii. We don't know. Anyway, we have no biblical proof of where this man was born. We don't know his mom. We don't know his dad. We don't know when he was born. We don't know when he died. But here's what we do know, is that he was a priest. And he wasn't just any priest. He wasn't the priest of On. He wasn't the priest of Baal. He was the priest of the Most High. Abraham recognized this priest. Now, the other assumption that people make is they assume that everything about the Bible, everything that happened is recorded. They say, well, Abraham gave a tithe one time and he gave it from the spoil. And I say, well, how do you know? Now, understand something, ladies and gentlemen, and please allow just a little bit of liberty. Just a little bit of liberty. You are going out to war. There's a certain mentality that you have. You don't know who your enemies are. You really don't know who's who. You have one goal, and that is to go. This is Abraham. Abraham has a goal. Now understand, there are literally 9 kings in this entire debacle. 4 kings fighting 5. Kings defeating kings and taking the spoil of kings, and Abraham's Lot got taken. Abraham's nephew Lot gets taken. Abraham has to strategically, not a man of war, but has to strategically now go into a war with Jehovah knows who to defeat these kings, to get his nephew and the women and the children that had been taken into prison by these individuals. And here it is, at the conclusion of this battle, this stranger just shows up. And Abraham says, you know what? I'm feeling pretty lucky today. Now, I don't think he said that. I'm just going to take everything I got and give this man I've never seen, don't have a clue as to who he is, 10th of everything. Now get your mind around that. Put yourself in that place. How does Abraham know that this is not another person coming to do battle with him? He's in the middle of a war. This is hostile territory. And this person just shows up, and Abraham just decides he's going to give him 1/10 of everything. Is it possible that this is not the first encounter Abraham has had with this man? The Bible doesn't say it is, but the Bible doesn't say it isn't. One thing we do know is Abraham knows who he is. How does Abraham know who he is if he's never seen him before? So don't assume. There are too many people reading into the scriptures and assuming, and someone once told me that when you assume, don't let people make assumies out of you. Hallelujah. Now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave the 10th. So this man is a great man. Abraham knows that this man is a great man. And verily, they that are of the sons of Levi, who receive the office of the priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is, of their brethren, though they come out of the loins of Abraham. But he whose descent is not counted from them. Now the Hebrew writer is trying to show us something here. He's saying, now understand something. Now brothers, listen to me, is what he's saying, because you know the book of Hebrews is written. Who do you think the book of Hebrews is written to? I think it's safe to assume that the book of Hebrews is probably written to Hebrew people. When you say, but it's written in Greek. You see, we've been some gullible people for a long time. The book of Hebrews is written in Greek. Huh? I taught this because it was taught to me. The whole New Testament is written in Greek. The Hebrew scriptures is the Old Testament. The Greek scriptures is the New Testament. And it dawned on me, shouldn't that be the book of Greeks instead of the book of Hebrews? And if it's the book of Hebrews, then it's very possible, being that it is written to Hebrew people, that maybe it has something to do with Hebrew. And the very context of the book of Hebrews, really deals with all of the things that pertain to the Hebrew people. This knowledge of the Almighty, this worship, established set of worship that was established long before there was even a Greek race of people. And the writer of Hebrews is trying to help his counterparts understand that, listen, brothers, that I know you all have a system and you've been formed over years and years and programmed over years and years of practice, that everything evolves around the Levites and the Levitical priesthood and the temple service. But let me give you some knowledge. Long before there was a Levi, there was an Abraham. Y'all know Abraham, right? And long before there was a Levi and a temple service, there was this Abraham fella and there was this Melchizedek fella. Long before there was a Levitical system and a priesthood that was based on the Levitical lineage, there was this priesthood that was established that we know very little about. All we know is that one of the priests was a fellow by the name of Melchizedek. We have no knowledge of where he was priest. We have no knowledge of his priestly duties. We have no knowledge of where he came from or where he went, when he was born, when he died, his parents. But you know he existed because it's in our scriptures in Genesis chapter 14. So it doesn't have to convince them. So now he's saying, listen, you need to understand, long before there was a Levitical priesthood, long before there was a Levi, long before there was a Jacob who brought forth a Levi, long before there was an Isaac who brought forth a Jacob who brought forth a Levi, there was an Abraham. And so this Abraham who Isaac, Jacob, Israel, and Levi was in his loins, paid tithe to this strange fella named Melchizedek, who was a priest of the Most High. Now you need to get this, because what he's about to lay down is that there was a priesthood established long before there was a priesthood that the people of Israel subscribed to by Moses, given instructions on Sinai. We also had to come to the conclusion as to when does the Torah begins. Does the Torah begins in Exodus chapter 20, or does the Torah begin in Genesis chapter 1? So when people argue that according to the Torah, okay, what part of the Torah are you talking about? Because most people, when they make these arguments, are arguing from Exodus 20 and beyond, or forward, not Exodus 19 past. So we see a priest receiving tithes, but he whose descent is not counted from them received tithes of Abraham and blessed him that had the promises. Now, Abraham is the one who had the promises. Did Abraham need the blessings of this man when he already had the promises of Jehovah? See, Abraham knew he knew something. And the Hebrew writer is trying to give us insight into what Abraham knew that now had to literally drill down through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition. Because this is what he's dealing with, is traditions. And without contradiction, in other words, you can't deny it, there's no argument, we are not going to strife. You all know that the less Abraham is blessed of the better. In other words, the better person is not being blessed by the lesser person. You see, it is the lesser person that is being blessed by the better person. Now, we don't even know who this Abraham is, this Melchizedek is, but we know who Abraham is. Abraham is our father. Abraham is the patriarch. And yet, Abraham was less than this man. And here men that die receives tithes, but there he receives them of whom it is witness that he lives. And as I may say so, Levi also, who received tithes, paid tithes. So for those of you who want to argue, the tithe belonged to Levi, no, they didn't. Levi paid tithes. Why would he pay tithes if the tithe, was he paying tithes to himself? No, the tithes belonged to Jehovah. For he, Levi, was yet in the loins of his father Abraham when Melchizedek met him. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Levi, 3 generations. 3 generations. Abraham in his day paid tithes through Levi, who is not born for 3 generations later. If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek and not be called after the order of Aaron? Now, Aaron was of Levi. And so he's saying, well, why would another priest arise? Now, I have to tell you something. Well, for the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. And the question, which is where we ended, is, was Melchizedek after Aaron, or was he before Aaron? The answer is, he was before Aaron. So why would his priesthood come after Aaron? No, his priesthood was before Aaron. Now, just because we didn't understand the priesthood doesn't mean the priesthood didn't exist, because the scripture clearly tells us that the priesthood exists, and Abraham, who was long before Aaron, paid tithes into this priestless system that we know absolutely nothing about. The priesthood changed, so the law was forced to change to adjust to the change of the priesthood. You see. Now, the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is if you read through the book of Hebrews, you're going to find Jehovah established a system for the sake of people who were hard-hearted, hard-headed, stiff-necked, and rebellious. At one point, he wanted to destroy them and start over. And he established a system whereby he had no delight in. Because the Hebrew writer lets us into it says he never delighted in the blood of bulls and rams and goats. Because even this system that had been established could only atone for the sins of men for a year. But there was a plan that the Almighty had, and this is the thing, ladies and gentlemen, is that we got to go before Adam. You see, Yeshua was the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. The Father had this plan long before he instituted this plan. And in the plan that he instituted, he had mysteries and things that he hid that he did not reveal, because had he revealed his plan, the people in the earth who is opposed to Jehovah would have opposed his plan, and the plan would never have come to fruition. So the writer says that if the rulers of this world had known that they were crucifying who they were crucifying, they never would have done it. Had they never done it, we would still be in a priesthood Levitical system, which he had no delight in. So this was a mystery. He hid it, and he hid it from his own people, because understand something, ladies and gentlemen. The very people that he established to run this system that he didn't like were the very ones who crucified the one they were looking for and didn't even recognize him, because the system had been developed, designed, and adapted for the sole purpose of not exalting the Almighty, but exalting men. It was the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious leaders, who liked the long seats, to make long prayers in the marketplace, to have the chief seats in all of the feasts and the festivals, who wanted to parade around like they were somebody. And those shenanigans are still happening today. Hebrews 9. We're going to run into some new territory here, and hopefully I need to speed this thing up, because I do want to conclude this today. Now, when these things were thus ordained, the priests went away into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of Jehovah. When the first system was ordained, this is what the priests did. But into the second went the high priest. Now notice, we see Abraham never encountered a high priest. He did encounter a priest, but this priesthood that Jehovah established, he says, I'm going to give you all a little glimpse, but understand, because the first time when Aaron's sons went into the tabernacle to offer incense, is what they did. People talk about strange fire, and they want to spiritualize strange fire now as to, oh man, you're offering up strange fire. What? No, they were burning incense in the temple. But a person who has no knowledge of the system is going to spiritualize it and make it say a whole bunch of stuff it's not saying, which is exactly what church people do. As long as I could put this word into the spirit realm, I don't have to live it out in the natural realm. I got the knowledge of it, but I don't have to do it, because everything is spirit. And oh, brother, you're just being legalistic. You can't miss it's the spirit that gives life. The letter kills. The letter is bondage. What? So you just make it up. Yep. We don't have to keep that stuff. We don't have to do that stuff. And so he says, into the second with the high priest alone, Aaron's sons went in, they burned incense. They weren't supposed to. Jehovah killed them. He told Aaron, you keep doing your work. Let those people take them, because if you stop what I'm telling you to do, to care for the sons that belong to you that I just killed, guess what? I'll kill you too. Now, this is the Jehovah. Now, understand something, folks. He don't change. He's still in the killing business. The last enemy, which is death. See, he just got a plan to where he's not going to kill you without giving you chance and space to repent. So he sends his messengers, he sends his spokespeople, he sends people, and he says, listen, I see you. I know what you're doing. You need to stop. You need to stop. I done told you 100 times. I done told you 7 times, 70 times to stop. Now you need to understand, I love you. That's why I'm not killing you. But if you don't stop, you're going to force me to have to take you out. I don't want to take you out. My desire is that you repent, that you come to the knowledge of truth. I don't want anyone to perish. Don't make me kill you. But he's still in the killing business. So he says, Aaron, let them come take your boy. You keep doing what I say do. And then he gave this command, don't come into this place anytime you feel like it. One time, once a year. That's the only time you're required to do this. And so, the second went into the high priest alone once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people. The Holy Ghost thus signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, as pertaining to the conscience, which stood only in meats and drinks and divers washings and carnal ordinances, imposed on them unto the time of Reformation. But Messiah being come a high priest. See, now we've got a high priest and notice what the writer says, of good things to come. By a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building. So when Jehovah gave Moses the blueprint for the tabernacle, it was after the pattern of the heavenly tabernacle. Who are the priests today? Now, this is a serious question. Those who have been chosen by Yeshua. Now understand something. Although we are all priests, Yeshua has chosen, ordained, and commissioned certain ones from among his people to serve in the capacity of equipping his people and preparing them for the ministry service. So Paul, who is believed to have wrote the book of Hebrews, is going to give us some insight, because understand something, the high priest, his family were the ones who ascended to the priesthood, to the high priesthood. The Levites, which were part of the Levitical priesthood, served in the temple. But get this, the high priest is the one who went into the Holy of Holies and communed with the Almighty. Yeshua is sitting at the right hand of the Almighty, interceding on our behalf. But he did something before he left here. He established a system in the earth that is most likely after the pattern that was established under the Melchizedek priesthood. The only problem is that we didn't see this priesthood in Melchizedek's day, but Yeshua is after the order of Melchizedek. So it is very possible that the system that he established was the system that Melchizedek, the priest of the Most High, was functioning in prior to the Levitical priesthood. This is what he did. Ephesians 4:7. But unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. Wherefore he saith, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts. Now this word gifts is not the word we get spiritual gifts, charis, grace from, but it's the word duma. And this he gave duma unto men. This word here actually is the word that we get gift from, but more properly translated is that these gifts he gave to men were really gifts to men. Let me show you. Now that he ascended, what is it but that he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth? He that ascended is the same also that ascended up far above all heavens, that he might fulfill all things. And he gave some. Now here's the gifts that he gave. The church identified these as fivefold ministry. But these are the gifts that he gave. Some he gave to be apostles. Are all apostles? Now some would want you to think, well, we're all apostles. We're all sent ones. But Paul, who wrote this, argues in 1 Corinthians, are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? And the answer to that question, obviously, is no. We could count the apostles in the Bible. We can actually identify the evangelists and the prophets and prophetesses in the Bible. We can even ascribe certain individuals who operated in a pastoral and teaching ministry. But everybody wasn't teaching. Everybody wasn't called to pastor. Everybody wasn't called to be an evangelist, although all of us can evangelize. Everybody is not called to be a prophet, though all should prophesy. Don't confuse prophesying with being a prophet. Don't confuse laying hands and people getting healed on being, now you got a healing ministry. You understand what I'm saying? We all have the ability to function, to operate the power, to manifest the power of the Holy Spirit, but there are certain individuals that the Almighty, through Yeshua, has anointed to do certain things in the kingdom. He gave some apostles, some prophets. Why didn't he give everybody apostles? They just make everybody apostles. That's what these folks want you to think. Well, we're all apostles. No, he gave some apostles. He didn't give everybody apostles. He didn't give everybody prophets. He didn't give everybody evangelists, pastors, or teachers. And then these individuals have a specific, now understand, we don't know the function of this priesthood of Melchizedek. It would be false to assume that they function after the order of the Levitical priesthood, because there was no Levitical system. There was no temple. There was no tabernacle. There was no altar burnt offerings and no altar of incense and no holy place and no holy of holies and no tables and candelabras. So I think the book of Hebrews, who is believed to have been written by Paul, is trying to give us some insight, but let me take you just a little further. For the perfecting of the saints. So these individuals are for the perfecting of the saints. Now here's the priests. We're all priests. We are a kingdom of priests. But there are certain individuals that have been called, just as Jehovah had the kingdom of Israel, and he selected from the kingdom of Israel a particular tribe to be the Levites, and from the Levitical people he chose a priest system from Aaron's lineage. Aaron was a Levite. So even from the Levites, he chose the priesthood and the high priest lineage of the priesthood. You get this? So who's doing the selecting? Jehovah. Yeshua is now equipping the priesthood, and he's given some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, pastors, and teachers for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Messiah. Till we all come in the unity of the faith. Now, this is how you're going to be able to determine, till we all come in the in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Messiah, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. There are people who want to control you. They want you to be their disciples. They're not preparing you for the coming of Messiah. They're preparing you to be a good member. That you have to get their permission to do the work of ministry. You got to get their authority to go out and evangelize. You see, where does the Father give these individuals the authority to control people? He doesn't. No one on the earth is given the authority to control another person. Yet, husbands try to control wives. Wives try to control husbands. Children try to control parents. Parents try to control children. Let me tell you something, folks. If you think you control your children, you better think again. You control their behavior maybe while they're in your presence, because they don't want you to knock them upside the head if you're that kind of person. But as soon as they get out from you, and they will lie with the straightest of face. Parents, you think you're a straight-faced liar? Some of you all got some straight-faced liars living in your house. Now, I love my children, but they have lied. And you know what? They got it honestly, because I was a lying somebody. I lied, I stole. I don't know if there's a person on the planet who hasn't gone into their mama's purse at least once. Yet. Do you hear what I'm saying? And listen, let me tell you something, folks. Understand something. We are all born children of the devil. That's our nature. Whether you are a bona fide thief or just a casual one. Whether you are every time you open your mouth, you lying, or you lie every now and then. You hear what I'm saying? A preacher asked a little boy one time, said, "Boy, tell me what's the difference between the lie and the truth?" He says, "The lie is the truth is the word, is how we're supposed to live, but a lie is a very present help in time of trouble." So we lie to keep from getting in trouble, and the very lies we tell once we get caught lying gets us into the trouble we're trying to not get into. But anyway, there are individuals. There are controlling. See, let me tell you something, folks. There are ministers out there whose identity is connected to how many people attend their worship service. When people call me sometimes and ask me, how many people come to your service? And it's like, where is this question coming from? The Bible, and those of us who have really small congregations, we've memorized the scripture, where two or more gather together, he's in the midst. But the bottom line is, what difference does it make if there's 5, 100, 1,000? I'll tell you, it makes a difference to people because it says to them what kind of ministry, and it solidifies whether or not you're a bona fide ministry, because of course if you are a good minister, you got a lot of people attending. Ask John the Baptist. When Yeshua was murdered, actually gave his life, all of his disciples left him. And there are people who follow for various reasons. He preached a sermon one day and the whole congregation left. You think he didn't chase them? He just looked at the ones that were left and said, you guys gonna leave too? Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. If you are about making disciples for the Messiah, that means that there will be people who don't necessarily like being in your ministry or under your teaching, because the words that are spoken is probably going to do more convicting, which is a form of healing, if you receive the conviction and allow the repenting process to take place so that you can produce the fruit you're supposed to produce. Or if you have a ministry that makes you feel good, you know, where I came from, they call those tickling ears, but does not require any change. Yeshua's ministry was a ministry of preparing people for his return, not building a big congregation or building a huge following. He didn't come to amass a huge following. He preached to the masses, but he discipled the few. And by the time he came to the place of his crucifixion, even his most loyal followers were gone. So you know, I'm not caught up in some grand delusion. I know what it's going to cost in order to do the ministry that he's called me to do, because that means sometimes you're going to have to say things to people they don't want to hear. I'm going to tell you something. When you tell people who love truth what they don't want to hear, if it's true, even though they get mad, they get angry, they might want to cuss you out, they thank you at some point for being bold enough to tell them what they needed to hear versus what they wanted to hear. I can't tell you how many people who've called me and told me, when I first started listening to you, you used to pee me off. You used to make me angry. I'd scream at you through the screen. I didn't hear them. But there are individuals out there whose identity is hid in a number of people. And, that's not what this is about. It's about preparing people for the coming of the Messiah, because he is coming. Verse 15, but speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Messiah. As a denominational preacher, you're taught to build the church, but you're not taught to build the church of Christ, the church of Messiah, the church of Yeshua, the congregation of heaven. You're taught to build the denomination, to add members to the roll of the denomination, so that when the denomination goes to the World Bank to build a new facility, they've got the interest of all their parishioners backing those who have the ability to provide that loan. See, when you got a small group and they ask you, well, we need to see your financials. Why do we need to show you our financials? Why does the kingdom of Jehovah need to be going into a den of thieves called bankers to show the financials of the congregation so that those wolves can lend them money at some exorbitant rate? And the Bible says we're supposed to be lenders, not borrowers. If you don't have the money to build a thing, wait till you get the money. Are you trying to build something you don't have money for and going in debt and putting the people in debt? Now you can't afford to preach the truth because they might leave. And when they leave, they take their wallet with them. They take their tithe and their offerings with them. So we got to tickle their ears and make them feel good so that they'll give. That's unfortunate, ladies and gentlemen, but that's what's going on across the country and around the world. They are the ones who rule. Who are the priests today? The apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. These are the priests that are about the ministry to the high priest on behalf of the people through equipping the saints for the work of ministry. These are the ones that he's given the ability to speak on his behalf, the ones that he's downloading the messengers of heaven, the ones that he's given the words to speak and to equip and to prepare so that people, when he comes, they are ready. And they're going to get a world ready. They're the ones who rule. Hebrews. Back to Hebrews. Remember them. Now, the scriptures that I'm about to share with you right now are typically scriptures you will hear in controlled environments, but you won't hear them much in messianic environments. And you certainly won't hear them in Messianic Judaism. They got other scriptures for you. Remember them which have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of Jehovah, whose faith follow, considering the end of their conversation. Now, what he's saying here is that, listen, make sure that what they are doing is what they're actually preaching. Make sure that they're not saying one thing and doing something else. Make sure if you're going to follow these people that they're practicing what they're preaching. Otherwise, they're hypocritical, and they'll teach you to be a hypocrite. Yeshua Messiah the same yesterday, today, and forever. Verse 17. Obey them that have the rule over you and submit yourselves. Now, what is he saying is that, listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is not something where people can exercise control, because you determine who you allow to control you and at what price. Everybody that is being controlled by someone else is getting something out of the deal. The moment they stop benefiting from being controlled, they stop allowing the control. Obey them that have the rule over you and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls as they must give account. And I'm not talking about to the headquarters. I'm talking about to the head. That they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable. He's saying, listen, these rulers, these leaders, these individuals that I've called to lead, you understand, I'm going to hold them accountable. You see, what I'm giving you is going to be, I'm going to be held accountable for it. What you're saying to people, you're going to be held accountable for. I am very much recognizing all the time that when I stand and I minister, and this is why I'm very careful about what I say when I'm here, because I know that when I speak, I'm speaking with authority. Not just commanding demons and laying hands and prophesying, but in speaking the word, because I'm speaking on behalf of what he's giving me. And what this is supposed to do is to cause you to grow. You're supposed to be growing. And it's not about you, trying to please me. It's about you trying to please him. Because I don't have a hell or a heaven to put you in. You won't be standing before me on judgment. My job is to get you ready for him, because he is coming. So understand that these individuals have to give an account, and therefore make their work a little easy so that as they're doing their work, they may do it with joy and not with grief. For that is unprofitable for you. Hebrews 13:24. Salute all them that have the rule over you and all the saints. They are at least salute you. Grace be with you all. Amen. And so we see here that in Hebrews chapter 13, after Paul, the writer, we believe, writes Hebrews, he concludes that the people understand that Jehovah has established a priesthood that was before the priesthood of Aaron, and he's established people that is responsible for ministering not only to the Almighty, but receiving from the Almighty that they might minister to his people to prepare his people for his coming. That was the role of the priest. The priest was the mediator between Jehovah and man. The priests were the ones who were offering sacrifice. The priest was in there saying, God, don't kill them today. Not this year. And then responsible for making sure that the people understood what the commands were, interpreting the commands, and judging and giving counsel to people when there were disputes or there was a lack of understanding of what the commandments were saying. Where do you tithe today and to whom? The apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Now understand something. There are many out there who call themselves apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. But the way you're going to know those is, as we saw in the book of Hebrews, that you now have to consider the end of their conversation. What are they teaching? Are they teaching against the law? Because anyone who's teaching that you're not under the law, they're not preparing you for the coming of Messiah. They're preparing you to burn in the lake of fire. They're talking about, you're not under law anymore. You're under grace. Well, the grace that brings salvation, according to Titus chapter 2, has appeared unto all men, teaching us that we are to deny ungodliness, worldly lust, and to live soberly and blameless in this present age. So anyone who's preaching the true grace message is preaching to you the gospel of the kingdom, telling you you need to repent. If you're living ungodly, you need to repent. If you're living in lawlessness, you need to repent. It's teaching us to live soberly and blameless, godly. In other words, we live according to his instructions, and anyone who's teaching you, you don't have to obey his instructions is not becoming like him, but becoming like them. Lawless. And don't just listen to them, watch them. I went to a Messianic congregation once, and the last time I went there, and this is why I went to that one time, that last time, is this preacher got up and preached right here in the city of Charlotte, preached a dynamic message. Dynamic. I was excited. Finally brought my family. My daughter was here from college, just graduated in education. Preacher preached on faith. Man, I was excited about it. Introduced him to my family. He introduced him to my daughter. She told him that she just graduated from college. She aspires to be in education. And the things that came out of his mouth, I just wanted to tell him to shut up. It's like, oh, education. Oh, that's not a good field to go in. It's hard to get a job in education. Oh, you probably need to do something else. It's like, what? Now you just preached this dynamic message on faith, and nothing but doubt is coming out of your mouth once you come out of the pulpit. You see, are they living what they're saying? Because there are a lot of people who get their sermons off the internet. They're not getting them downloaded from heaven, and they're certainly not living what they're preaching. So you just don't listen to what they say, you watch what they do. If your preacher's a whoremonger, you don't need to be in that church. If he's sleeping around with the young ladies, and God forbid the men, there are preachers out there today sleeping with the men in the church and the little boys. Not just the women. They prefer little boys with their muscles. Do you understand what I'm saying, folks? You have to watch what people do and see if it lines up with what they say. And if what they're teaching and what they're doing is not aligning up, and if they're teaching, you better make sure it's from this book, from the beginning to the end, not selected pieces. Just like, they give a selection of music. Don't let them give you selections of scripture. And then you need to read it yourself to make sure that what they're preaching is actually what it says. Be a Berean. Absolutely. Finally, to those who lead you to Messiah. And remember, the Messiah is coming back. He's not looking for a bunch of whores. He's not looking for a bunch of pimps and people who, trying to impress. He's looking for a people who are spotless and blemishless. People without spot or wrinkle. That is a people who may not be perfect, but they are working their faith out and cleaning up their lives and getting the mess out and everything that is not like Yeshua. And when you start living a life like that, let me tell you something, it's painful. Because you're going against your nature. Your nature, according to the scripture, is fallen. You are the children of the devil, which is why you need to be born again. And when you are born again in the kingdom, your desire is to please the king, not to please the men and the women. Your focus is to please him because you want to make sure that you hear, well done. Not splash, splish, splash. I want to make sure you're in the right line. Hallelujah, somebody. Hallelujah. Anyone who teach you do not have to tithe is misleading. And anyone who teach that you're supposed to tithe, but you're not under the law is a liar. How can you teach tithing and against the law at the same time when the tithing is in the law? You got these jackleg preachers out there talking about, now bring all the tithes so God don't curse you. Well, let me tell you something. If you read the book of curses, it's those who don't keep his commandments. The ones that you're teaching people they don't have to keep. So your messages is putting people under the curse. Father, help us. Bless us. Help us to do right by you in your sight, to do those things that please you, that brings honor to you, not to hijack your word or to take that which is holy and mix it with the profane. Father, I pray that you will help all of us grasp the knowledge, the understanding, the wisdom of the kingdom. Give us insight. And even through the teaching today, Father, we know we treaded on some ground that is for some unfamiliar, connecting certain passages of scripture that probably have never been connected with each other before. Trying to understand this priesthood of the Melchizedek, of Melchizedek, and how Yeshua fit in that, and how we all fit in that, and how we're supposed to live under this priesthood today. Father, as we bring this teaching to a close, I pray that you will make known to us what it is that you require, and that you search all of our hearts to make sure our motives are right, and that what we're doing is pleasing. And whatever we're doing and saying that is not pleasing, I pray for your correction. We all want to be ready for that day of the last trumpet. We want to see you. We want to live like you are coming. We want to clean up our lives and get all the leaven out. We want to do what is right in your sight, even though it may not be popular with the population. Though we live in this world, we know we're not of it. Our citizenship is in heaven. And we're trying to live here in this earth the best we know how without compromising your word. Help us to do that. I pray your blessings upon your people, those who have come into the revelation of tithing and giving offerings, that, Father, you continue to lift them up, show the world around them that they are walking in financial favor, blessing them, make them lenders, cause family members who are in need to look to them because they have not only enough to sustain themselves, but more than enough. You said that as we keep your commands, you will make us lenders and not borrowers. You put us above and not beneath. And too many people are crying, we're the head and not the tail. And in the same vein, saying we're not under the law. Hijacking the blessings as if they can do such a thing. Father, help us to be balanced in our approach to your word. Help us to understand how to walk righteously in your kingdom, simultaneously in this world. I pray your blessings upon every family, every household, every man, woman, every husband, every wife, every child. Pray that you will speak and cause your will to be known and give strength to walk in your will as you reveal it. Bless them, keep them, in Yeshua's name. Amen. Shalom, saints. Tithing and giving first fruit offerings are critical parts of the believer's faith and has its foundation back in Genesis 4:4, when Abel brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And Jehovah had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Abel was commended by Jehovah in Hebrews 11:4, where it states that by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. Solomon said in Proverbs 3:9-10, honor Jehovah with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall your barns be filled with plenty, and your presses shall burst out with new wine. The prophet Malachi wrote in chapter 3, verse 11 and 12, to bring ye all the tithe into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, says Jehovah of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there should not be room enough to receive it. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field, says Jehovah of hosts. And all nations shall call you blessed, for you shall be a delightsome land, saith Jehovah of hosts. When we tithe and give offerings consistently in obedience to Jehovah's commandments, we can count on him to keep his promises to us and consistently meet all of our needs. It is our Father's desire to bless you. However, it begins with you and your act of obedience to tithe and give offerings. Do it today. Shalom.
For more information, visit www.arthurbaileyministries.com or call 888-899-1479. House of Israel International Services is made possible through financial contributions from brothers and sisters like you. Thank you.